Welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast, a podcast for the naturally curious who want to define their own path. I'm your host, Kristen Rocco, and here I'm sharing bold move stories that propelled my guests from curiosity to action. And in doing so, they've defined a path that is purposeful to them. Through these stories, I hope you'll be inspired to pursue your boldest dreams. Today, I'm very, very excited to welcome Sarah Alaimo onto the show. As the strategic fractional HR leader at Elevate Consulting Collective, Sarah partners with organizations to develop high-impact HR strategies, tackling everything from leadership development to compliance. She's the driving force behind retention-boosting workforce initiatives, cultural transformations, and leadership programs that truly make a difference. Today, we are going to hear Sarah's bold move story that extends well beyond her professional bio. It's Sarah's life bio, which includes her journey to sobriety. She authored a memoir titled Pearls and Probation: Adventures of an Alcoholic Good Girl, and it details the life of a short, I love that, Sarah, a short, blonde, determined, God-loving drunk who found her strength when she woke up with 8 staples in her head and the determination never to drink again. It's a real life story of drinking, debauchery, daring decisions, and what it took to finally discover her true happiness. Sarah, welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast. Thank you for sharing your story and for this opportunity to have an important conversation with you. I appreciate it so very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today. And yes, I am only 5 feet tall, so I had to include that part in there.
I love that. So, in almost all bold moves, we have to become a new version of ourselves. This is something I've learned over almost 50 interviews I've had now. And
Wow.
there's little more telling than having to change your identity than going from alcoholic to sober. And I wanted to start off by reading a passage from your memoir. You said, like an actress, I played a role every day of my life. On campus, I needed to be a studious, faith based young woman. For my family, I needed to be that plus ambitious and seeking to take the next expected step in my life. For my friends, I was also trying to be all of that, minus the studious, faith focused parts. I was not lying to anyone else while starring in these roles. It just seemed like the way to do life. I observed others and figured out that at some point I would fall into the real me. And when I did, the need for guessing and costume changes and line memorization would evaporate. Whew, I had to read that over and over and over again, Sarah, in your book. That is just very compelling. And I think so many people can relate. So I want to start there and ask you the question: what do you attribute to needing to uphold this idealistic view of yourself in all of these different roles you needed to play?
That is such a great question. And I haven't read my book in a while or really kind of thought about that. So just hearing you
Yeah.
read that, I just automatically felt exhausted because for
Mm,
31 years, that's how I lived every single day, being exactly who I needed to be for you and then being who I needed to be for the next person. And I think it just kind of came from a place where nobody told me you need to make everyone happy, you need to make everyone feel a certain way, but from the beginning, as long as I can remember, I remembered needing to make sure that whoever I'm interacting with was happy with me. And then maybe I could be happy with me. Just setting these expectations for, okay, if I am X, Y, and Z and I can achieve X, Y, and Z, then maybe this constant feeling of anxiety or this constant feeling of, and I only recently obviously learned these words, but an imposter syndrome. I felt like the
mm,
rest of the world had this playbook. They had the
yeah.
instructions for life. I didn't get that. So I feel like I was constantly trying to run to catch up. But again, nobody told me these things. This was just kind of how I was wired and continued to be for years and years.
Nobody told you directly, but I wonder indirectly from a societal, cultural standpoint. that you were getting these messages were being reinforced in what you were seeing. And you just thought that was the playbook. Okay, I guess I have to be this to achieve X. I have to be X to achieve Y, and you wanted to achieve Y, so you're doing X. Does that resonate?
Oh, so much. I think at least the way I was raised, it was okay, you're gonna get good grades so that you can get into college, then you'll have a job, you'll meet someone, you'll get married, you'll buy a house, you'll have kids, and then your life will be set. And all of that will happen as long as you study hard and get into a good college. Then everything will be fine, everything will be good. Well, we all know that there are, like, yes, that can be true, but life happens. There's so many different things that pop up. And, the second that I graduated from college, I wasn't presented with this massive 6-figure job and a husband and a house. Like, what in the world? And, that's an expectation I don't want to set with my son. We do, a lot of factors have to come into it. And I think that it just took me a while. And I found other ways of coping with that and dealing with life. Kept thinking that if I do this, this, and this, then I can, achieve. And I don't know if that was from just my upbringing, because, my parents went to college and then they got married and then they got the house and they had a successful business and great. Or I also, had that faith-based background growing up in the church. And it's just kind of a place where, through actions, you can be virtuous. Through your actions, through your faith, you can have X, Y, and Z. But maybe if your actions aren't good enough, or if your faith isn't good enough.
Yeah.
And so I never felt like my actions or my faith or my grades or my job or any of that was ever good enough. So I just worked really hard all the time to try to achieve perfection.
This is all adding up to a lot of pressure that you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And I just keep getting like pictures of bricks falling on me as I try to keep them all up on my shoulders, but yet more bricks keep getting added on and I keep falling down a little bit more inch by inch. Is that what led to the drinking? Was to escape from this perfectionism and the pressure you felt?
I would say that's a portion of it. So I didn't really actually start drinking until after college. So a little later than a lot of people. There was no high school or like not much going on in college because I went to a very strict private Christian university. But the second I graduated, it was like all hell broke loose. But that was because I felt like when I drank, I had this immediate feeling of relief, that I could feel comfortable in my own skin, that what I was saying might be interesting or more fun, or maybe maybe I was more beautiful. Maybe I kind of felt like more of everything in a very positive way. But a lot of it was also just kind of to escape this level of, I talk about being in high school and being voted like teacher's pet. I had this like image of being this good girl. I didn't want that image. That wasn't serving me. So I wanted to go the exact opposite.
Got you. Yeah. And you actually say in the book, I want all of the other self-proclaimed good girls to know that it is okay not to be perfect. And I want to share that message at the outset here of this conversation, because I feel like that's why you've written your book, to share your story. And it's why you join these conversations in a very vulnerable way, to put yourself out there and share your sobriety journey, which I know as we get into it has a lot of hardship related to it, a lot of low moments, hard moments, challenges that you had to navigate to get to the other side. But the message
that was not anything going to tell anybody ever, especially not, on a podcast, especially not in a book, especially not on LinkedIn, especially not my family. As I got more into my recovery and sobriety journey, I was thinking about what it was like when I first started my recovery journey, when I first got sober. I didn't see anybody out there that looked like me that was speaking out about the process. I still thought about an alcoholic as like an old man in a trench coat under a bridge holding a bottle in a bag. That was the vision that we used to see on TV and in movies.
Yes.
And so it just kind of continued. More and more opportunities to write and speak out came up. And
Yeah.
I just decided that there are a lot of other good girls out there who might be afraid to start that journey and needed to see someone who looked like them or had a similar story. Because as I've learned in my almost 10 years now in recovery, I hear my story everywhere in different people's shares. And I've learned that it's not exactly someone who looks like me. And our stories might not sound exactly the same, but at
Yeah.
the core of it, they're exactly the same. And that's the beauty of storytelling. And that's the beauty of my recovery journey.
I agree. And while you're saying that, I'm thinking, while all of these great listeners are tuning in today, they may not have become an alcoholic or used excessive drinking to, feel better about or to relieve themselves of some of this pressure or to put a mask on or whatever it is. But we all know and understand that expectation of needing or wanting to be perfect. And I think that's also something that as we go through your story, everybody can relate to. However you handle it, there's, obviously the challenging ways to handle it that are, the behaviors that aren't going to necessarily get you to where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also there are some ways to shed this good girl perception of how you need to be and those expectations that are positive, and that you have seen that full circle journey. And I'm so excited that listeners are going to get to hear that from you today. When I first met you, Sarah, and I was explaining to you that I host this podcast and it's called Bold Moves, How Did You Know? The very first question you asked me, is it just about careers? And I said, no, it's about anything. It's career, it's life, it's whatever a bold move is to you. And I think you stepped back and said, oh, good, because do I have a bold move to share? So tell me, like, why did that initiate such a big reaction within you? And I think from here, let's kind of get your story in the essence of your story from start to finish around how you journeyed from using alcohol to solve problems to then becoming sober and realizing more positive ways to deal with life circumstances.
Oh, most definitely. I think it probably elicited, that sort of response because we were having a really fun time having a conversation. And I feel like this is just kind of, I was so freely given this amazing life that I have right now in recovery for, like I said, for almost 10 years. And I know that, I do belong to 12-step recovery program. And our 12th step is giving back what we've been given. And every time I get an opportunity to be on a platform such as this, I'm so grateful. I want to share my story just so that maybe there's one person out there who has just a glimmer of hope and might know what a next step might be. Because for
Right.
so many years, I didn't have any hope. I didn't think that there was any next step. It was a disease, or it is a disease that hit me fast and hit me hard. And that is, it's a family disease. We've had it in our family on both sides for generations, but it
Right.
wasn't anything anyone ever really talked about. They would say, oh, grandma had a stroke due to lifestyle, or so and so passed away due to lifestyle, or a heart. Like a lot of times people will just say it's a heart attack when it actually was, excessive drinking. I mean, nowadays we're talking more about drug overdoses, but drugs are not a part of my story. So I want I want it to be a conversation. And I do think that one of the really good, amazing things that did come out of the pandemic is a shift in actually talking about recovery and kind of taking that stigma away. Prior to, in early recovery for me, people would still whisper. Individuals in my family would say, do you still go to those meetings? Yes, I go to those meetings and I am out loud, happy woman in recovery. And I want to share that.
Love that.
I didn't, like I said, I didn't start drinking until, about the time college was ending. And immediately I had that feeling of relief. That anxiety that I felt all the time was lifted when I drank.
Mm.
When I wasn't drinking, it was right back. And a lot of times that guilt and shame was even larger because of maybe what I had previously done, the night or the day before. And so I just continued to drink at that, just drinking at all kinds of problems. And it didn't become a problem until this list in the back of my mind of all the yets. I hadn't been arrested. I never got at that point, I hadn't gotten a DUI. No one was really getting hurt. It was really just me. I was the one with the consequences, right? Until I wasn't. And I could tell, in certain friendships, I was losing friendships. My sister was coming to me and, talking to me about my drinking. I know she had talked to my family about it. I still had a job. I continued to climb the corporate ladder. Wow. That was something that was really important to me. I defined a lot of my personal life success by my career. Because I thought, when I get that certain, job title or hit that certain salary, then I'll be happy and then I won't have to drink so much.
And I'm assuming that because you're climbing the corporate ladder, you're getting promotions, you're getting accolades. Of course, I don't have a problem, right? Did that kind of affect you in that way too? You're like, how can I have a problem? I'm being so successful in my career. This is all that I wanted.
Yes. Well, and the socializing and going out and having drinks is such a huge part of just the corporate kind of map. And at that time I was working for someone who drank just like I did, and he was super successful. So there we go. It wasn't a problem.
Right.
Until one night I hit a car in front of me. I just tapped it. Just a little tiny tap. Pulled over. Everyone's good. Everyone's fine. But the individual in the car could tell that I'd been drinking quite a bit and followed me home. Parked behind my car in my driveway.
Really?
And just insisted that he was going to call the police. I went inside. I brushed my teeth. I went to bed. And then I had a knock on the door from the police officers. I didn't know at the time that I didn't even have to answer the door, but I honestly didn't think that there was really a problem. I couldn't have imagined that my blood alcohol level would be that high. So I put on some Converse and went out in the front and did all my testing for, counting backwards and alphabet backwards. They ended up taking me in and they impounded my car from my driveway.
Wow.
The breathalyzer machine was broken. So that just counted as a refusal. So I immediately was charged with a DUI. The crazy thing is they just took me home. But I called my boss that night and said, and at that point it was like 2 a.m, and said, I'm not going to be able to make it in tomorrow. My car has been impounded. They'll have to keep it for 24 hours. We had a really important meeting the next day at a local hospital. And he said, okay, I got the meeting, no problem. But tell me what happened. And so I did. I shared the full truth with him. And he said, okay, no problem. I got a guy. We'll take care of it. And he did. The next day, when I got into the office, late, obviously, because I had to wait for my car, he introduced me over the phone to a DUI attorney and paid for it. And, 6 months later, I had it pled down to negligent driving. So there we go. That was one of the big consequences. And a lot of times a consequence that can really shape people's lives. But, I had it taken care of. I had it pled down. No problem. I clearly don't have a problem. I just won't get another one. We're good.
Yes. And so your story continues. What happens next?
Well, about a year, almost to the day, I unfortunately had another DUI. This time leaving a movie with some friends, and I live at the time I lived right outside of downtown Seattle, so there's a lot of one-way streets in downtown Seattle. And in my mind, after having a good amount of wine that evening, one of those streets was not the one way that it actually was. I don't think that's really how it is anymore. I'll just drive really fast down this street. It'll be no big deal. I just want to get home. I want to see my dog. No big deal. Well, it was a big deal. I ended up going out into oncoming traffic, and I did hit another driver, unfortunately, and crushed my car. He was fine. Both of our cars were totaled, and I'm a very courteous alcoholic, I crashed my car right next to the downtown Seattle precinct. So they didn't have to take me very far at all.
This time, no knocking on the door. It was right next door.
And the exact same arresting officer. So Officer Johnson and I met again almost a year to the day. And this time I was super smart and I knew not to take the breathalyzer because last time it didn't work. So as a refusal, they then got a court document from a judge to take me up to the hospital to do a blood draw. We waited hours and hours and hours. The officer treated me with nothing but kindness, despite, I mean, he'd seen me before. He'd seen my kind before. It was kind of a crazy experience. It's the hospital he took me to is a level 1 trauma center here in downtown Seattle, right. The only one in the whole Pacific Northwest. So they get all of the serious injuries. And while I'm sitting there waiting to have my blood drawn, I'm hearing literally people coming in with like gunshot wounds and, gang fights and things like that.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, how did I get here? Why am I here? Why am I wasting these people's time? And then he took me home. He said, it's late at night. The jail is probably just packed. It's just going to be, it's just not a place for you. We got to my house. He let me out and he just said, I'm going to say to you what I said to my sister. You need to get your act together. Your life doesn't have to be like this. And that was it. I've never seen him again, but those words resonated and I still think about this man to this day. I need to thank him. The unfortunate thing is that didn't do it. The next morning when I woke up and realized this car that I really liked was totaled and I had some injuries that, of course, I thought I was, above the whole thing. And I told the EMTs that I didn't need any attention. Well, I had burn marks on my arms from the airbags and all of these cuts and scrapes and bruises. But I thought, like, if I let them know I'm okay, then they won't think there's anything wrong here.
Right.
And so I decided I needed to move because if I moved where I lived, they call this a geographic, then everything will look different. Everything will be different. So I moved closer to work so I wouldn't have that commute. Wow. Yeah, super smart. Yeah. Got a new car and continued to drink at the fear that I knew that I had hit someone. I didn't know what was coming. This wasn't good. My attorney had already suggested that I look into treatment. My therapist had already suggested I look into treatment. And finally, a few days later, or I guess a few weeks at this point, I was out on a boat with some guy that, I don't know. Guess we were kind of on a date. It was a friend's birthday party on a houseboat, 2-story, and had spent the whole day out on the lake in Lake Washington. Beautiful. I brought 1 bottle of wine to share because I thought, okay, I'm regulating my drinking. Maybe I'll have like a couple glasses of wine and it'll be fine. Well, it was a party. Obviously, there was more alcohol there. I don't know all of the details. I don't know all the stories. I know I made some really great friends that night who, of course, I've never seen again. And when we docked, I actually fell off the top of that houseboat onto the concrete dock below. And thanks to my blood alcohol level, I kind of fell, what they say, more like a rag doll. And that's probably why I didn't die from that head injury because my blood alcohol level was at a level where I really should have died. I went right back to that same ER and they put those staples in my head once my blood alcohol level finally went down. But the doctor there in the ER said, you should be dead.
This left me with the biggest hole in my stomach when I read this part in the book. I jotted down what that said. You said in the book, she shared with me, she being your sister, I believe. She shared with me that the doctor told her I should have died from my fall off the houseboat onto the concrete deck below, that my blood alcohol level was 3.9, should have killed me if the concussion that resulted from the fall didn't. And yet, you escaped these 2 obstacles, the 3.9 blood alcohol level and the concussion that resulted from the fall. So this, I think, is what you identify as your rock bottom moment that changed everything. Yeah. Before we get into your sobriety then, on the other side of this rock bottom moment, I pulled an excerpt out of the book because it's so interesting to hear the lies we tell ourselves and just continue to buy into this belief that, oh, we don't have a problem. Nothing's going on here. It's okay to look the other way. Your family, I know your sister for sure, and then your family was really concerned about some of these things that were happening. And you wrote that you were trying to make your dad believe that you were okay. And I believe it was a circumstance where you were at dinner one night and you said, but what he would have found were late night Google searches, including, am I an alcoholic and pills to make me sick if I drink alcohol? So it's clear that you knew you had a problem, and yet you weren't ready to admit it or accept help. What? And I want to be the most compassionate interviewer on this topic. I have no judgment whatsoever. And so any question I'm asking is just really out of a curiosity
You're
to
fine.
understand and also then support other people who might be having these questions. So how can you identify, like, if something's becoming a problem, what would you tell somebody now, looking back at your experience, to say, you know what, stop lying to yourself, get real, get some help about this?
And that's such a hard one, because what I've learned from my experience and then the opportunities to speak with others when they're at that low point, the jumping off point of, we can either head in a direction of recovery or head in a direction of continuing to go down that scale. The big thing is the willingness. Someone has to be willing. So, we can lie to ourselves all day. It can be very obvious, and I always knew at night when I was myself, when I was drinking and in all of the truth and the honesty, I knew it. But by day, when I was sober and, swearing up and down that I was not going to drink that night, it was a whole different story. So really, if I'm talking to someone and they just don't know, well, the main thing I would say, first and foremost, is if you're wondering if you're an alcoholic, you probably are. Just saying. But, if you honestly cannot go without a drink, if you can't stop thinking about it, they say that it's an obsession of the mind. Yes, it's a disease. And when you do a brain scan of someone who is an alcoholic, you can see the certain receptors in the brain lighting up because of this whole reward structure. Our brains are different.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's an excuse, but I'm saying it's a fact and it's science. If you honestly cannot go a day without a drink, and if you are just thinking about it constantly and white knuckling, then you probably do have a problem, and you don't have to live that way. I know it sounds impossible at the time, but there are millions and millions of people out there living in recovery and have been. I know I do talk about the 12-step program that I belong to, and that program has been around since the 30s. It works.
Yeah, living proof, right?
Yeah.
All right. We got to the point in your journey that was the rock bottom moment, and you woke up from that experience, learned what had happened to you, understood how severe the consequences could have been. So why was that such a shifting moment for you? And then how did you get going on the path to your new life?
It didn't really hit me until the next morning. I obviously had to, my blood alcohol level had to come down. I'm sure I was on some sort of pain medication for the staples in my head. And when I woke up, yes, I had a crazy headache and was crazy dizzy, which is something, as a result of the concussion, and something that I ended up dealing with for quite a few months in early sobriety. But I had, and I know it sounds very woo-woo, but I had one of those like white light moments where I woke up and I just knew I never had to drink again. It was just a feeling. I had no idea what it meant. It sounded terrifying. It sounded like no fun whatsoever. How was I ever going to have fun again? My sister and her fiance at the time came by because that friend that I had been with stayed with me that night to make sure that I was okay. And my sister and her fiance came by to pick him up and take him home. And she couldn't even talk to me. She couldn't look at me. She was so mad at me. And once they left, I was chatting with my roommate and I just said, I'm an alcoholic. And she said, okay, sweetheart, what can we do? And she had a little bit of experience and handled the whole thing amazingly because she had previously been engaged to someone who was an alcoholic. So she was just happy that someone else in her life was admitting it. I had no idea. I knew someone from high school who had gotten sober. So I sent a text and said, what do I do? He told me to call this 800 number and go to a meeting. There was no way I was going to go anywhere. I was so dizzy and out of it. I spent the rest of that day trying to make sure that, work was taken care of and figure out what that next step was going to be. But the next day I started making calls and called a treatment center called Residence 12 and called another one and made appointments to go get an assessment. That was just the next step. I had to continue to be in action while I was willing. And that's not anything that I knew to do. That's not anything that I, set out and made a plan to do. It's just how it happened. And I'm so grateful. I do believe that there's a higher power out there that really got me through to that next step. Because remember, I still had a pending DUI out there. And at that point, that was 2 within a certain period of time. I could have been facing jail time. But I would say this motivation was less about potential jail time and more about, I can't live this way anymore. I've been looking for an out. I'm finally there. I finally went an entire day without drinking. I didn't think about drinking because I had this concussion and I was dizzy. And so I went in and did an assessment at Residence 12. And they told me that I was a late stage alcoholic. At that point, it had been a number of days since I drank. Again, thanks to the concussion. And so they suggested outpatient since I had already not been drinking and been successful at home. So every evening after work, I would go in and start the whole recovery process. It was, my therapist was happy. My attorney was happy. I was terrified.
Yes, of course.
But at least at that point, I knew I was still going to be invited to my sister's wedding, which was less than 30 days after I got sober. I was supposed to be her maid of honor, and I don't know if I would have been welcome had I still been drinking.
The insight you shared around taking immediate action when you were in that willing headspace is so powerful. And so I just wanted to stop there and let that sink in because it relates to a lot of different situations in terms of making bold moves. And I think that was the pivotal moment.
Yeah.
People often have a desire, and that's what we're talking about, right, Sarah? You had a desire for a change. And it's okay, but in order to, and I say this in my keynote, in order to take your dream into reality, you have to take the action. Otherwise, it just stays as this dream seedling, I call it, and it doesn't have the opportunity to grow into the next manifestation of yourself, which is where the real transformation is and which is where the real fulfillment comes from. So I love how you share that in your situation. It was so powerful. It also reminds me of Mel Robbins has a 5-second rule, and she always says, if you have an idea, you better do it within 5 seconds. Otherwise, it's going to stay as an idea. And so all of this is just really coming together for me as that epiphany moment where it's we can have all the desire in the world that we want to do something and that something else is calling us to be something different or somebody different or do something different. But if we just keep letting it sit inside of us, it's not going to become our new reality.
I love that so much. And, this was an example of a lot of times when I'm speaking or telling my story, I realize things in the moment. And I actually had not made that connection until today, which is very strange because that's, the kind of thing that I would suggest to women that I'm sponsoring. We need to always be in action. So thank you for inviting me onto your podcast and helping me make that correlation.
So you got into this program and it's so, and I I know I keep kind of drawing some parallels back and forth between
Oh, it's great.
your experiences and then what I've found with other bold movers. But the second ingredient, I should say, is who. And your recovery program is that who for you, because people often need to help them get to new places, get to, learn new things they don't already know, guide them in their journey, uncover things that they don't have answers for. And that recovery program represents the biggest, probably, who of your life that showed you the way to sobriety. So tell us as much as you can about that journey from rock bottom to now you're in this program. What did you do and what did you learn? I think more importantly, not it's about doing, but it's about what did you learn about yourself to help you change your behaviors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, I started seeing people that, and when I say looked like me, I want to say that, I went to a program that was just for women. So,
Mm-hmm.
first off, that just really helped me to feel a lot more comfortable right off the bat. And a lot of the women in my group were other professionals because we would meet in the evenings. So, it kind of just made sense that these were people who were by day still going to work and then at night trying to make this, big, massive change in their lives. So straight off the bat, we had that in common. And I hadn't felt like I had anything in common with anyone, probably to that point, almost ever. I could hear this woman who was this super successful attorney telling her story in such a vulnerable way. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I can actually
Right.
tell these people maybe half of the truth, maybe. And then once I, dipped my toe in that pool, I just continued to grow from there. And it was the honesty and being able to be honest. And I wasn't feeling any judgment. No one was, oh, really? You did that? Oh, gosh. Why?
Right.
It was more of like, oh my gosh, yeah, I did that. And then the crazy things started happening is those insane things we did or thought or said or felt started to kind of become funny in a sick way. I was like, oh my gosh, you too? It's just that it's that camaraderie, it's that fellowship that just really started changing for me. Because I was very averse to it initially. Everyone was saying like, oh yeah, you'll meet people at treatment or you'll meet people at meetings and you'll hang out, you'll go do this, you'll go do that. And I was like, I'm good. I have friends. I'm set. I'm not really looking to make this a lifestyle. I'm just not going to drink. I don't know how this is all going to work. And I did for a long time. I kept the same friends, kept the same routines. I would still meet up with my friends at the bar to watch the game and just not drink. And it wasn't that big of a deal. I still had a nice time, and I did have friends who didn't drink alcoholically. But over time, I didn't want to hang out there anymore. It just wasn't my scene. And I'm not saying that I can't go to one today. I definitely do. Like I'm going to go to a baby shower at one in a couple of days. But I had met a new community of other people who were, early in their journey, and we stuck together and we kind of started to create new traditions together. Like that was the first time I ever did a Galentine's, certain things like that. And just, I don't know, just embracing a whole new community of like-minded people. And even though not everybody looked the same or came from the same background, we had that commonality. And I started making new friends. And, a lot of them I would call family today. I ended up meeting my husband in recovery. I never would have thought that. Oh, geez, I don't want to, AA, that's just like old salty men. Gross. But no, not all. Because I got to think I'm there too.
Funny enough, apropos to Valentine's Day, which we are recording this on Valentine's Day,
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, happy Valentine's Day to you too. You've just talked about Galentine's Day being that amazing reason to celebrate female friendships. And then, you're talking about meeting your husband in recovery. So I think it's very, very significant to talk about that on Valentine's Day, which is another piece of the transformation puzzle, right? Where all of these great things start to happen as you fulfill who you really are meant to be.
Yeah.
But
I was just going to say, and that was a number of years later once I had, done the work, been honest and thorough and done the step work, and then also done the full recovery program. Considering, I had that whole DUI, I had to be in a deferred prosecution program for 2 years. And it didn't mean that I had to go every single day. I just had to go once a month and do some check-ins. I had to have court slips signed at meetings to prove that I'd been going. For one of the years, I had to have a breathalyzer in my car. Try dating with one of those in your car.
Right. That
I could do a whole podcast on really awkward dating and recovery.
Oh my goodness.
Just, not everybody knows about it. And, I think that there's a stigma out there. I remember telling this one guy, it was like the third date, and I said, actually, I'm an alcoholic. And he goes, oh, that makes so much sense. You really like coffee. I was like, oh, okay. There we go. I get it.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, goodness.
Wow. Yeah, no, I'm sure there's some great stories as you navigated that experience. And it must have felt a little bit like a whole new world to you because you had been in the other world for so long, which is actually leading up to my next question. I know even when I'm making bold moves related to bigger things I want to do and becoming a new person or a new version of myself, I slide backwards. We all do. We all sort of have those moments of, oh, I don't know. Is it like, doubt? Can I do this? Mm-hmm. Is this, do I have what it takes? I don't know. The couch over there is way more comfortable than the uncertainty out there. Right. So how did you embrace this mentality of, like, I'm sure there were sliding moments in that like very initial phase, and I don't know for how long, maybe you experienced those, but if you could share a little bit about what that looked like for you, and then what were some of those little things you would say to yourself to keep yourself on that path?
Yes, great question. I think initially I was too terrified to think about what could happen or would happen. I could not put my mind in a place of like, oh, I can't do this. I'm going to have a drink. I just knew that I couldn't go there. And what I would tell myself in that moment is, okay, that doesn't mean you can't have a drink ever. This means right now, today, in this moment. I had to take things, not even just one day at a time. I had to take it all the way down to like 1 minute at a time. And 99.9% of the time it was, I don't want to feel the way that I feel right now. And so I would call a friend or call someone else in the program or call even a family member. What the biggest thing was getting out of myself, get outside of my head, get over myself and see how I could be of service to someone else. And just reaching out and calling people can make a world of difference. I've always, my family lives in California, so and I live in Washington. And so I call my mom a lot. And so, I think we got to, work on mending our relationship through a lot of phone calls.
Wow.
I would call other women in the program or call people who had more time than me. And it just helped me to get out of my own head. It wasn't until years later that I felt like, okay, I can never give up. Like, I can never stop the work. But it was actually right before my book came out. I was really stressed about something to do with the cover. And, I needed to get something to an editor. And I was on this timeline. And my husband and I were traveling. We were down in LA. And I said something to him like, oh my gosh, I just want to drink. And he goes, no, you don't. You just don't want to feel the way you feel right now. Let's go get a snack. And I was like, all right. And like, that was it. That was enough. That was perfect. They have this saying that I learned in treatment about HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And if we can decide which of those 4 categories we're in at that time, a lot of times that can just completely change your mindset. Like, such tiny little things can change where you are in the moment. We just need like a quick redirection. And
that's so helpful.
Isn't it? And you can use it in any part of life. It doesn't have to just be in recovery. I was having a conversation yesterday with a woman who's new to recovery, and she was talking about how she has all this time now because a lot of things have happened in her life, and she no longer, unfortunately, doesn't have a job at the moment and selling her house and those sorts of things. But she was like, I get to figure out what I like to do because I haven't gotten to do what I want to do in years.
So long.
So it is finding out who you actually are. And, during these career moves or making changes in life, a lot of times we didn't get the opportunity to focus on those things. So asking ourselves what makes us happy or what we like to do, because we're always growing, we're always changing. We're older now. What can we do? What do we do? What do we want to do?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. I love that. I have many conversations also about, especially mid-career, where I think we both are right now. It's like we've been doing the same thing for 15, 20 years, and sometimes you're just tired of it and you want to explore new things about yourself and take on new hobbies and passions. And sometimes it can be a little scary to jump into the unknown when you've been doing something for so long. But that's where the next point of transformation is. That's where the next place of becoming bolder is, to be honest.
Yes.
So outside of now the sobriety journey, that you have found new bold moves. And I'm sure, I can just count a couple because of reading your book. And I'd love for you to talk about that becoming an author, but that's one. You became an author and wrote a book to share your story. You found the love of your life, and then now you're also launching your own business, doing that fractional HR consulting that I shared at the top of the call. So, wow, could you have ever envisioned this for yourself? And how do you process it all? How do you think about it all as it relates to the person you're becoming? And how proud do you feel about all of these things? Does just going through the sobriety journey just make you feel like a more resilient, capable person because you've done something so hard?
It's actually really great to bring up this conversation today. I wouldn't be where I am today without it, but I just know that this is the only life that's possible for me if I want to have a life, is to be sober and in recovery, actively, being active in that space for the rest of my life. And I know that sounds it could sound crazy to some people that this is something I have to do every day for the rest of my life, but I see it as something I get to do. I get to ensure that I'm showing up for the people in my life as I should. I get to ensure that I'm not, focused on me in my head, and, I get to focus on the positive. And if I don't, then I can start seeing those things creeping in. I'm not showing up for people in a positive way. I'm not showing up for my family in a positive way. There is a gift, I guess, to having a spouse who's also in the program. I've gotten called out, a handful of times or so. And that can be infuriating in the moment, but always a good reminder too. And, we get to do the journey together. We're not here trying to judge one another. It's not my place to judge his program. But like I said, I never thought that I would tell anybody any of that story. And I never thought I'd be an author. I always thought of my sister as the writer. She was the one, she was the smart one. She was the writer in the family. But it was actually beginning of 2020. And my husband knew an author down in LA, and she was going to be leading a memoir writing course. And he said, that would be so fun. Let's go do that. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm not a writer. And we made plans to go, but then obviously the world shut down. And so instead, that author created an online community where authors could come and write together every day. And again, I was so intimidated, but I had that time. It was 10 a.m. every day. They would just get together on Zoom, maybe chat for a few minutes about what they were working on, and then just write for an hour, and then come back and, just kind of chat. And it was this amazing community that I got to be involved in a time when our communities were very virtual.
Yes.
I never had any plans to publish that. I just thought, okay, if I write my story, maybe that will help me when I'm speaking, which I get to do, every so often I get to tell my story. And as I kept going, I heard other people writing their stories or just publishing books in general. There were all kinds of authors
Yeah.
in there. And that's when I started thinking about that good little girl out there who was scared and didn't know what to do. So that's when I decided to publish it. Again, never had a plan to talk about it, in a professional aspect, but now it's something that I actually have spoken about, and I actually have it on my LinkedIn that I'm a recovery advocate, that I'm an author, and I write for a publication called The Sober Curator. It's an online magazine, a really cool community. It's not just for people in recovery, but it can be just people who like to live an alcohol-free lifestyle. And it's just something I get to recover out loud now. I have,
Gosh, that's so good. That's
it's
so
amazing.
significant.
I never thought I would.
Well,
But
and
I've
I think
heard from women all over the country, and little tiny, even just a quick message to hear that I was able to help someone. I mean,
so
that's
good.
huge, huge. That's what all this is for.
I heard this from somebody. They said, the more you can out yourself in the areas where you're vulnerable is where the transformation continues to come, when it continues to come. I think it's because
Wow.
sometimes there's shame. And I mean, maybe you can identify with that. Like, even as you're choosing sobriety, there must be some shame attached to what led you there. And now, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, right? But there's underlying feelings that can contribute to you feeling like you can't share outwardly. And I think when you get to that point of being able to share openly and outwardly, you really have healed yourself, probably, in a way that empowers you now to be upfront and honest and open, and that has the potential to impact many, many people.
Yes, yes. And there really aren't parts of my story that I'm necessarily ashamed of, but I do share my story appropriately depending on who I'm speaking with. I had the honor last summer of speaking at a women's retreat, and it was an hour long. So I needed to, I decided to tell my entire story, all the good, all the bad, all the ugly. But being in a room of women, I knew I could share a lot differently than in a room of men or even in a professional
Yeah.
setting. I don't mind talking about my recovery. I've had the honor of working in recovery friendly workplace situations, and that's something that I would love to help a company set up, because substance use disorder is it doesn't discriminate. It's everywhere,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And
Yes.
we do live in a society where the stigma is lessening, but people can have their own personal stigmas in their families, and that costs companies a lot of time and money, and usually the resources are available through whatever the healthcare benefits are. And a lot of times, if we can just take the person out of work for 30 days, they'll come back. They'll come back themselves. And I was going to be as loyal as any employee ever when I had the opportunity from my boss to focus on my
Right.
recovery. Every single day at noon, I would go to a meeting because he told me, you put your recovery first, this job is second. And that's what I needed at that time. And that was amazing. That was the biggest gift.
Yeah.
And I would definitely recommend any employer
Yeah.
seeing anything in their employees to give them that opportunity, because when they come back, that is going to be one
Yeah.
hardworking employee.
Oh, I love
And
that.
it's a disease, and
Yeah.
people need the help, but they can recover.
I appreciate you joining me so much, Sarah, to share your story and give hope to people and remind people of what they're capable of. We are capable of so many great things, and it's responding to that inner knowing that there's something out there calling to you, and it's up to you to answer that call for, kind of cliche way to say it, but in all different circumstances. And yours certainly a very compelling one that shows the very rock bottom of moments and how it can all turn around. So again, thank you so much. My final question is, what do you know today about being bold you wish you would have known earlier on?
Wow. Just do it. I mean, literally, what did I have to lose? And the rewards on this side of
Yeah.
having the opportunity to be my own boss, living this life that I've always wanted. I didn't know that that was something I wanted. I didn't know that was something I could do, but I saw others doing it. And like you know, started chatting with them and seeing what the potential was and realizing that can include me. That doesn't mean that not everything is everyone else, because I kind of have that handbook now, because we all writing our own. I kind of forgot about that part of it, that the handbook was, we're not all handed one, because we all have our own.
Thank you so much, Sarah. If people want to learn more about you, your work, your book, your socials, how can people find you?
Yeah, so for work, I have Elevate Consulting Collective. That's my website. And then also on Instagram, I have Sarah D. Alaimo on Instagram, where I talk a lot about recovery, but I also, do talk about the professional life and just the life of being a mom to a toddler. So I just have fun there. And then sarahalaimo.com is where all my books are. So just find me on one of those.
Anywhere and everywhere. Well, thank you
Exactly.
again, Sarah. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you joining us. And for everybody else listening, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.